Thank you for joining the podcast for Beyond the Banter. Before we get started, you need to know some important information. If you need support immediately, please reach out to one of the following organisations. Lifeline on 131114, Beyond Blue on 1300224636, or Men's Line Australia on 1300789978. If your life is in danger, please call 000 immediately.
Beyond the banter. Yeah, beyond the banter.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Beyond the Banter for another episode. We're continuing down the path of our series of conversations with Noni from PHS. Should start that again.
PSHA.
And today's episode is obviously going to be around domestic violence and some of the things that contribute to the different environments people have to experience. And hopefully we'll get some good insight into it, what makes people tick, how we get to some of those situations, how we can identify it, how we can help.
Yeah. I think, there's so many layers to it, and that's what, we're hoping to get out of today is understanding all those layers. There's so many different types, and you could be sitting there and you could be doing it within your own four walls and not even realising it, and it's a chance to have a listen and maybe make some changes in your life, or maybe your brother-in-law, your sister-in-law, whatever. Maybe there's signs there that you haven't seen before. The podcast is definitely not gender-based. This is just a general topic around domestic violence. It's spreading awareness across domestic violence as a whole.
And it can be also against children, right? It's not even partner to partner. Or it could be children. It could be to your parents. Abuse. So,
that's true.
There's a lot around it.
Yeah, that's true. And look, as a part of what we're doing, it's a big part of the messaging we're trying to get out there for people to seek help if they are going down that path, or they do recognise that someone is in a little bit of trouble that may need to go and get some professional help. So I'm looking forward to hearing from Noni on this one, and just maybe hopefully people out there will listen to this and maybe take some key points away from it.
So we're not the experts of it, so let's get Noni in.
Let's do it. Bring her on. Done.
Alrighty, so I guess probably a good starting point, a really good starting point for us, I think, is just having a really good understanding of what domestic violence is and what the different types of domestic violence are. So I think it's typically when we hear domestic violence, I guess the first thing we think about, what we would have traditionally thought about. I think that we're far more understanding of it in society in Australia at the moment, for all of the unfortunate reasons around the significant rise in DV. But I guess what we typically would have, whenever someone would have said someone's a victim of domestic violence, we would assume that's more physical assault. But what we know is domestic violence is so much more than that. So we have physical, we've got physical domestic violence, physical assault, sexual assault. We also then have emotional abuse and financial abuse, and that sort of ties into that coercive control that we were just talking about pre-session. So there's a number of different types of domestic violence that somebody may experience along the way. And I guess there have been laws put in place specifically around coercive control and that level of financial and emotional abuse against individuals in society because of the significant impact that has on people. So whether that results in people losing their homes and all their finances and then being homeless, I guess is probably one of the key things that we're seeing from that side. So we have individuals who may not be earning money in the family, who are then have nothing. And so they're having to start all over again post-domestic violence relationship. So there's a number that's sitting there, and it's a little bit different to, I guess, what we would have talked about, guys, like 20 years ago. It would have been physical, but now there's all these other layers to that. So you've got your emotional abuse, which is more around, I guess, what that term that we hear a lot around, gaslighting or humiliating somebody purposefully, or berating them and making them feel less than in that relationship as well. And I guess the most concerning thing that we're seeing in Australian society is the level of domestic violence increase. And I think that we're all struggling to understand what we need to do to make it better. And I think that that's government. And I also think that's medical and policy. Like, it's something needs to happen, and it needs to happen really quickly, right? So we're looking at the number of deaths that are occurring per week. And I guess I'll sort of talk a little bit about, like, why is this happening? And part of me goes, are we sort of evolving where, I don't know, we laughed about this in a few podcasts ago where we talked about, when we were at school, you didn't win everything. You weren't given a trophy for everything. If you were bad at something, you were told you were bad at something. If you were told no, it meant no. And that's kind of changed over time where, and I think this is why people's resilience is a little lower too, in that somewhere along the line it's changed where everyone's wonderful. No one gets told no. Everyone gets a trophy. If somebody does something bad, then, let's say we've got an adolescent who does something bad, we go to protect that individual, in perhaps instead of managing the consequences of that behaviour. And so we've sort of changed as a society where we're less punitive, more like protective. But then when it comes to a situation where and I wonder myself, and I guess this is just personal opinion, but I wonder whether individuals who haven't been told no ever are all of a sudden told no. So if we're talking about someone's in a in a sexual relationship and their partner says no, they're like, that's the first time anyone's ever said no to me. That's unacceptable. And so therefore their response is emotion or physicality. There may be a situation where you may have a member in the family who's the primary caregiver who's like, I don't want to go back to work. I need you to go back to work. I'm not used to being told no about that. So I just think I was sort of looking at it from the side going, is that what's happening? It's where we've got a generation of individuals evolving where we're not saying no, and therefore the reaction to that is that individual hasn't learnt how to deal with knockbacks or being told no, or that they're not good enough. I think it's some part of it, but then
an interesting viewpoint, and I've talked about that at home, just with the kids, that they've got to understand the no's and the knockbacks, because once you get into the real world outside of school, you're going to get no's, you're going to get rejection. If you're in a sales, if they pick up a sales job, you're going to get 45 no's for every 2 yeses. You've got to build that resilience to rejection.
Yeah, and certainly it's an interesting one, right? As a business owner and sort of looking at different generations and individuals, you do see that some age groups really don't respond well with no, or the understanding and rationale of why something might look the way it does. So I think that there needs to be a shift somewhere there in an accountability, and how do you do that? But I do think there needs to be a shift in accountability for the younger, for our children, in that you can't always win everything, and when you don't win, you don't always get a trophy. Everyone gets a trophy. Got to put in it, so there's all of these these things that are happening, which I think is just leading towards a more confident an individual that sort of has, is really, really confident in life, and then they're told no when their world comes crashing around them, and they're not happy with that. There's that component, and then there's the data around DV that says if you're that you're more likely to be a perpetrator of domestic violence if you view domestic violence as a child. So if you're a child and you've seen one of your parents being a victim of domestic violence, then there's significantly higher percentage of that individual also, being a perpetuator of domestic violence as well. I mean, so those are the stats there that, you're more likely to, and that makes sense, right? If you've watched an environment at home and that's been deemed acceptable, then that's how how would you possibly know any better if you didn't have a parental figure that thought that that was acceptable?
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. I think that's a really important point as well, is about early detection of, just say you do go down that path of mental health conditions and issues in that age group. I know we've spoken about it in the past on podcasts, but there is that age group. I think it was 18 to 22, 18 to 24.
24, yep.
Yeah. So that group, how do we try and change that group? Is that identifying that age group and people that may be struggling in that age group, digging into their early childhood to try and deter them and try and change their thought process around domestic violence if they have seen that in the house and it's just been neglected by the parents, or it's like, oh, they'll just go out of it and carry on with life and stuff like that. Yeah. Is it that age group that we try and change it somehow?
It's such a loaded question. Well, not a loaded question. It's such a loaded issue. I think this is why we're struggling with it, and we're all like, "How is this happening in Australia? This is just so odd to us." You certainly hear of things happening in other countries. There's got to be some sort of heavier stick, I think, too, that comes in.
Yeah. I think also, like, to your point, that there's so many different layers of control, physical, mental, whatever, that people don't really understand that you sitting there berating your loved one or whatever is a form of domestic violence, whether it's not physical or whatever, and people need to stop and see those early signs. But I know it'd be hard to do.
But there's different. Correct me here. There's different ways though. Like there's the perpetrators that do it behind closed doors.
Yeah.
In any of those formats. And then there's the ones that are a little bit more obvious, where you'll be sitting at dinner and you're like, did he just talk to her like that? Or did she just talk to him like that? So those ones you can probably pull up and go, hey, that's not right. But then
do we?
But as a society, we probably don't. Like, let's just stay out of it.
Yeah.
Right, that's not our fight.
Yeah, you finish dinner and you walk away and you go, oh my goodness, wasn't that out of line? Yeah.
So there's the part that's behind closed doors and how do you identify them. But then there's the society issue that if something's not right, we need to be pulling it up.
Yeah.
And saying, hey, if you're going to carry on like that, I'm not going to be with you. Right?
But what if it's a complete stranger? Like, just say you're sitting in a restaurant. And
I'm probably more comfortable pulling up a stranger than I am someone that I know, to be honest, because I don't know them. So I'm just like, hey, that's not right.
You don't have to deal with the repercussions of it later on. Yeah. I think we talk about...
Actually, repercussions is a good point, because if you do pull it up, there's a risk that something's going to happen.
Of course.
Later.
Of course.
Yeah. Oh, look, it's really distressing talking about it, actually, because it's. I think that I'm always that individual that's quite pragmatic and going, how do we fix it? And I'm like, I think it's multimodal, multifaceted. Like, so much needs to change in order to sort of address the issues at hand. But to give a little bit of context around why somebody might walk down the pathway of DV, and I provide the caveat here in saying I am not at all making excuses for why people walk down that pathway but I think it's trying to understand. So we have individuals that may have experienced it, viewed it, or been a victim of it themselves. And then you've got individuals who may have more of an anxiety-based disorder, who have just an extreme fear and need to control everything around them. So I always talk about anxiety is so fear-driven. It's, the fear of the unknown, the fear of the worst thing happening. So therefore, individuals that have anxiety-based disorders may lean towards trying to control a partner, because it somehow helps them manage the fear and the anxiety in front of them. So I'm fearful my partner's going to spend all our money, so therefore I will restrain him or her from spending money. So there's a lot to sort of be said around how someone sort of positions themselves and where they are from a wellness perspective and how that results. So we may have, someone who does have a chronic anxiety disorder who's trying to control someone. You might have control someone in their surroundings, and that's sort of where I think we get that financial abuse probably more likely happening, where we're controlling that situation. Or there's that individual, we see these are the characterized in the media, but an individual who presents themselves in a particular way. So they look a particular way, their partner has to look everyone has to be completely perfect, and therefore there's that level of control around how that person presents, what they look like, how healthy they are. So the level of abuse goes down to individuals being told what they can eat, how many calories that they can eat, how many times they're supposed to go to the gym so that they are the perfect partner. Like there's so many different, and then that just leans right into the issues that we have with social media, right? So just this perception that everyone has to be perfect. So there's that part. And then I also think that we have greater access to everything in a violent manner, right? So you can see anything with extreme violence in war-torn countries, movies, gaming. You can see anything. So that's certainly going to have an impact on the youth. So we're talking about 18 to 24, seeing heinous physical acts of death or attack occurring. Like if you're seeing that, then that's got to have some impact on individuals going, oh, well, that's what's happening in the world, so that's acceptable.
Yeah.
So there's so many layers to it, right? But I guess you were asking the question around, like, what do we do if we see these signs? What do we do? How do we address it? So I think, and this is also we may see, so if we talk about maybe perpetrator first and then maybe victim, because we see both of these in our environments, right? So if we talk about perpetrator first, I think it's a difficult one, and you're right. Like by addressing it, there's a fallout of friendships, and it's also then managing whether you see that sort of perpetuating itself into a workplace, and you don't want to be damaging your employment and those things if you see that. So I think that in those situations, it really depends on how well you know that person, how you're connected to them, and how you can help them see that maybe that behaviour's out of line. And there certainly are, which I'll share with you after date, there's some places that individuals can go to gain support that may be a perpetrator of domestic violence or feeling the need for physicality towards a partner or children. So there are lots and lots of, and I think that's an excellent thing that there are services there to support people in need who may not be able to manage that level of aggression or abuse that's occurring. So, and again, understanding that if somebody has been brought up that way, then we need to have services that they can access to support them. Or if someone has had something happen that is leading to that, then we have services available to support those individuals. The flip side of it, the victim of it, it's a really hard and loaded one. I think it's about talking to that individual around having them understand. It's almost like you're putting a safety plan in for them. Yeah. So there's been a number of times. So from a personal perspective, I saw someone in the shops who looked really quite distressed, and she had said to me over she'd given me little bits, just enough for me to know what was happening over a few years, but nothing substantial. And I only ever saw her in the supermarket. And she said, I'm leaving. And she looked terrified. And I looked her in the eyes and I said, are you safe? And she couldn't answer me. And I said, okay, well, you know exactly where I live. So I don't care what time of day it is. I don't care, I don't care what time. You just turn up at my front doorstep if you need to. So I think it's about providing people, it's saying to them, you're not a burden, and that, if not you, someone else, that is where they can go if they feel unsafe as an individual is probably the first thing, right? So what we know, I guess in those situations, and like there's some data around it too, in that only 1 in 2 individuals will access support for DV. So it's only 50% of people will go and access with their current partner, if you want to call them partner, but meaning it could be sort of any type of DV sort of relationship happening there. It may not be a partner, it might be, a relative. So only 50% are accessing services. That's a huge problem. And that's with a current partner or current sort of in a current situation. And then 2 in 5 will report it after the time. So here is our issue. We have people who are victims that are not, don't feel like they, and so the research sort of shows that people don't know where to access services. They don't know who to go to or how to access services, is the first one. 2, I think they're too petrified too, with the result of what might happen. And 3, I think people don't have the financial means to exit. And so then they're stuck. So I think it's safety plan first, and identifying what services are available to people, which I'll share as well. And I wanted to make it really clear in this conversation, so it's very obvious in our conversation today, we've not made this a gender-based thing. This is happening for men and women. Okay, so it's equally bad for whoever it's happening to. We know the stats on, it's happening more for one over the other. That the conversation piece, though, is that it doesn't matter where that's happening. We need to be able to support and address people where we can.
With
so
those stats, though, there would be a lot of underreporting there, I'd assume too, right? So there'd be a lot of people not reporting it to the police.
Well, I think if you're in a relationship and there's kids involved, there might be that fear of not wanting to leave that relationship because of the kids. So you're willing to put up with whatever happens at home. So you're just going to put up with it because you want the kids to be safeguarded. And well, one of the things I wanted to understand, and I don't know if we have the information right on hand, but I'd love to know with the stats, how much of those stats are alcohol or drug related? I'd love to know that, because obviously it would be a big part of it, I would think. I hear people with bad tempers and stuff like that, and using a bad temper as an excuse in some situations. So, maybe not for today, but I'd love to understand how much of those situations are drug and alcohol related, and if that's where some of it is stemming from.
I think that I don't have any stats to give you, but we can certainly pull some of those and share those at a later time. What I would say to you, though, is there's no doubt alcohol or drug-fueled violence is a thing. Like, there's no doubt, but I think that and somebody who's maybe under the influence of drugs and alcohol, their inhibition's lower. So the likelihood of those behaviours is greater. But I would say that it's interesting, actually. I want to go pull those stats. I would say that there'd be a correlation, but I would say equally that there's a lot of the DV that's occurring isn't as at the same time. So the answer is yes, of course, it would be impacting on it, but but there's other forms that we're seeing where it's not.
Because I've heard similar where when there's like a state of origin match, DV increases.
Weekends and stuff like that. I've heard
that's right. So then, is that rage because of alcohol, or is that rage because the team lost, or is that rage? It's just that tribal kind of behaviour of
it's one thing triggering something. But look, from my point of view, and I'm not perfect in any way, but for me to sit here and try and understand how someone can hit another person or be abusive in any kind of way. And again, I'm not perfect. I'm not sitting on my high horse here, but
try to control aspects of that relationship.
Yeah, I can't understand in my head if I had a mate sitting next to me and they were abusive physically, mentally to their partner. I don't think, like, I wouldn't be able to understand one bit where that would even come from. And I don't know if that's a problem in society as well, as if I know that's going on, obviously I'd try and address it, but I don't understand what's going through their head to get to that point, because it's a big no-no, and I don't know. It's
hard to rationalize. Yeah, I always said it's hard to rationalize the behaviour, isn't it? Like when it's so far removed from our own selves and what we would do, it's often really hard to understand how it gets to there.
Yeah.
And it's...
I mean, is it work, or is it just more prominent in the media and there's more information around it these days?
I think that there's so many different societal changes, right? So I think I absolutely think that this domestic violence has always been a thing. But what I guess, if we're sort of looking back to probably our grandparents' age, you would have just shut up and not spoken about it, and no one would have known about it.
Yeah.
So whether it's actually more, I guess we couldn't really answer that question outside of, we know it absolutely was happening. But I think that, again, we talk to access to information and social media and everyone being more across everything in general, we're hearing about it more. So I think that that's where the societal sort of changes or generational changes have meant that it's more in the forefront. But the number of deaths that are occurring as a result of it is extreme. So we would say that what we know based on reportable events is that it's far worse than it's ever been.
Yeah, touching on what you said about our grandparents, I guess that would have been very much that behind closed doors type thing.
Yeah.
We talked about
100%.
it. Whereas now it does seem like there's, without going into detail, a lot more prominent events. Quite severe consequences.
Well, there's a lot you don't hear about. That's the thing. There's a lot you don't hear about. Like, it just won't make the news, But you've got me thinking, ever since we started this conversation, you got me thinking, and I was thinking back to the schoolyard, right? If you're a bully in school, right, and you're picking on someone and you get away with it that whole time in school, you're just going to grow up thinking that that's acceptable, unless you have a reality check where you go, shit, that's not acceptable. But if you're doing it constant, and you're being a bully, and I know we're sort of going to go on social media a bit later, but, is that, well, I think it is giving someone the characteristics to be able to carry on that through life. And then you mix in alcohol. They get to 18 or 16, they start drinking, and then they...
But I guess that comes back into that schoolyard bullies probably in an environment that has that position anyway.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I think what you're saying is that people that have these particular types of overbearing behaviours without consequences may, I think is probably the word, may not grow out of that, and that perpetuates into the home and work.
Well said, Naomi. Exactly what I was saying. We've got on this new sounding thing, we've got a touch button that's an applause, so we'll add that into that part, because I think that deserves exactly what I'm thinking. But look, I just, again, I and it's something that I need to educate myself more on, and people around me, I just can't understand that someone could be doing that behind closed doors, and it could be someone, like, could be you, and I wouldn't have a clue. I think there needs to be more education about looking for those signs and what we can do as society to be able to maybe report those signs, or if you're not happy with it and you're not happy about approaching you about it, where can I go to report that so that someone actually does look at it?
Yeah.
That's right. And if it's at that point where you don't feel safe reporting it, but you know it's happening, then, you have that. Do you have that obligation to be contacting the police and having a conversation with them? Yeah.
And I think you do. I personally think that you do. If that's what the police are for, right? And you could go there and police could turn around and go, "Yep, we will deal with it, or we won't. Thank you for reporting." But I think as a person in society, I think there has to be that obligation.
Yeah.
I think maybe that's me. I don't know.
I think there's a few things I thought would be really important to talk around community attitude, because if there's anything as a group for anyone listening to this that we can change, it's some of these thought beliefs that society tends to have around DV. So there's this thing where individuals go, oh, well, you know, and there's been some data done around it, right? So people feel that if that person stays in the home, and so this is like a survey of community attitudes in Australia. Oh, well, if he or she stays in the home in a domestic violence relationship, then they deserve that ongoing DV. Like, there's some really significant stats around these perceived, like the attitudes of society around victims of DV, or there's still the one that alarmed me the most was 19. This is Australian-based survey. 19% of people believed that women reported DV just because they're annoyed at their partner and are trying to get back at them. And it's like, this is why we have underreporting, right? Because the community attitudes still exist where an individual isn't believed when they do report it. And then they have to go through this heinous reporting process and have that strength to sort of talk through that.
Yeah. I mean, that's probably even more prominent too with, like, if DV's physical, there's often signs like physical marks. Coercive control or financial abuse, emotional abuse, there's not physical signs. How
do you prove it, right? Yeah. I think that there's the coercive control stuff's really interesting, you know, like it's, I will put these photos of you on social media if you don't do this for me. That's terrifying, right? So, and anyway, we usually end up talking about being terrified for our children growing up and what they're in for, and having to sort of explain to them that all of these things aren't okay. But, you know, there's sort of data too around, you know, when I made that joke about that woman, or I made that sexual, you know, that sexist comment, oh, you know, that person just took it hard, I didn't mean anything by it. Yeah. It all sort of starts from there around these societal attitudes, you know, or if we're sort of talking about people being assaulted in public, you still hear that, oh, well, what was she wearing this, you know, you know, she was wearing this outfit, what did she expect, or why would you walk on your own of a night time? There's this, like, we've really got to hold ourselves accountable and start changing the attitudes that we have around that. Doesn't matter what you're wearing, you don't deserve to be attacked or killed. It doesn't matter, you know, it doesn't matter whether you're walking through a park or not on your own. Like, so there's all these, just like we almost come up with an excuse for all of these behaviours to make it acceptable. Yeah. So if there's anything out of sort of this session today, it's about going, let's as a group stop coming up with excuses and actually just go, it's not acceptable. Yeah. And how do we fix it together?
Absolutely.
So, and again, you know, I think it's really about doing our very best to educate. And I think, going back to your point, Chris, around do we start with his 18 to 24 group, I think that the public, I can sort of say public and education system is really, really hammering consent, respect, cyber, cyber interactions. And I think that the messaging's right. It's just about whether that can push through. And then I think it's our responsibility as parents and adults to actually listen to what our children are being taught and take that on board. Because I think it's they're being taught it. Yeah. But then we need to hear it and then mirror it with them. So that's an
Get home.
important part,
They get
right?
home and they talk about it, and you're like, oh, that's not how you do it. Like, we didn't do this, and we did this back in the day.
Well, you know, there probably is some more there, but you know, I had an incident with my son. He went out of bounds, and I said to the teacher, "Did you tell him? What did you say when you said he can't go there?" And she goes, "Oh, we can't use the word can't."
Mm.
Hang on a minute. What do you mean? She goes, "We can't use that word. We have to." She gave me this long spiel of what she had to say to him. I'm like, "No," I just pointed to him and said, "You can't go there. Come back." As simple as that. Like,
Yeah,
so sometimes I wonder if the language is not blunt
firm
enough.
enough.
You know,
I think that leads
we
back
talked
to-
about
yeah.
what we said before. You
Yeah.
know, there needs to be that you can't be there. That's unacceptable. Come back.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
End of story. Short, to the point.
But we as adults need to accept that that's going to be what's told to, you know. I think that we've got individuals who are like, how dare you, you know, speak to my child, or, you know, how dare you? And it's like, come on, we've got to take, you know, responsibility for our actions and teach people what is right and wrong. And but we've got to do it in a way that doesn't berate people, have them feeling lacking confidence or worthless, but we've also got to hold people accountable for their actions at the same time.
Yeah.
So it's not an easy gig.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. No, that's good. That's awesome. Any
No, nothing.
final questions? I think it was really good. I think there's a lot to be explored there. I think over future episodes of the podcast, we could maybe break it down and do those categories that formulate domestic violence. I think it'd be very good for people to actually understand, and maybe they don't even realise they're doing it inside their own home. Maybe the information they're hearing goes, "Oh shit, I do that. I say that. Oh, you shouldn't eat that because this or that." Like, that could be happening where people don't even identify that. Hey, there is a problem there. So I think it's touched on a lot of good topics, and
like every episode we have, we can talk for hours.
Yeah,
on every
100%.
subject, right?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Yeah, awesome.
All right. Well, thanks again, Noni.
All right,
Appreciate your
thank
time
you.
again, Noni. As we always say, it escalates the podcast. It gives people more information to be able to go away and look at these sort of topics that we're talking about as well. So for people listening, you know, we'll put some show notes in. We'll get some additional information and chuck that in. And look, if you are one of those people and you have heard this, then please go and speak to someone or get some professional help. And once again, thank you, Noni, and we'll see you in our next podcast.
Thank you.